The Last Challenge. The air in Hong Kong was heavy that night, thick with the smell of burning oil from street stalls and the constant murmur of passers-by. Bruce Lee adjusted the cuff of his white shirt, feeling the fabric stick to his sweaty skin. In front of him, Sammo hung, then a young 18-year-old fighter with a provocative smile, crossed his arms over his broad chest and let out a raucous laugh. "You?" said Sammo, shaking his head as if the idea were absurd. "The great Bruce Lee? I heard that you train with those Americans, that you make cute films. But here, in the ring, is no place for dancers." The men around laughed, some of them acquaintances of Sammo, others just curious, attracted by Bruce's growing fame. The challenge had been launched days before, in one of the many film studios where they both worked. Sammo, already respected in martial arts despite his young age, didn't like the way Bruce was treated like a legend before he even proved his worth. And Bruce, always proud, never turned down a chance to show that his words were not empty. "You talk too much," Bruce replied, his voice calm, almost soft. "And he speaks as if he had already won." Sammo narrowed his eyes. "Then prove me wrong." The makeshift ring was a courtyard in the back of an old studio, surrounded by crates and filming equipment. There were no judges, no clear rules, just the fighter's unwritten code: respect until the first blow. When the two got into position, the circle of spectators closed in anxiously. Bruce didn't move right away. He stood still, feet slightly apart, hands loose at his sides. Sammo, impatient, rushed forward with a broad punch, hoping to catch his opponent off guard. But Bruce dodged it with minimal movement, as if his head were made of smoke. The blow grazed him, and before Sammo could recover, a side kick connected with his ribs. The impact was dry, and Sammo staggered, but didn't fall. He recovered quickly, growling, and attacked with a series of short punches. Bruce blocked some, dodged others, but didn't fight back. It was as if he was testing, measuring the opponent's strength and speed. "Is that all?" Sammo teased, panting. "Or do you just know how to run away?" Bruce didn't respond. His eyes, dark and intense, showed no emotion. Then, when Sammo advanced again, he moved. It was too fast for spectators to follow. A front kick connected with Sammo's chest, knocking him back. Before he could stabilize himself, Bruce spun around and threw a roundhouse kick that hit his temple. Sammo fell to his knees, stunned, and for a moment, silence filled the courtyard. Bruce approached, breathing controlled, and extended his hand to help his opponent to his feet. Sammo hesitated, but accepted the gesture. When he stood up, still dazed, Bruce just said, "Enough talk." Nobody laughed after that. Years passed, and Sammo Hung became a legend in his own right, a martial arts master, a brilliant film director, a man who helped shape kung fu in cinema. But on nights like that, when fatigue set in and memories came back, he still remembered the weight of that kick, the precision of that blow. And I knew that, in the end, history would only remember one name. The last meeting. The years had not softened the memory. Sammo Hung still felt the metallic taste of blood in his mouth when he closed his eyes, the throbbing pain in his left temple, as if Bruce Lee's kick had left an invisible mark, a permanent reminder that, at some point, he had been surpassed. Not by brute strength, not by superior technique, but by something deeper, the clarity of purpose that Bruce wore like a second skin. In 1973, when news of Bruce's death spread like wildfire across Hong Kong, Sammo was on the set of Enter the Fat Dragon, his first film as a leading man. The team stopped filming, and the silence that followed was heavier than any defeat. He remembered that afternoon in the courtyard, the outstretched hand, the dry phrase, "Enough talk." At the time, it had sounded like a surrender. Now he understood that it had been a warning. Years later, when success finally arrived, the awards, the fans, the films that went down in history, Sammo realized that he had never gotten over that moment. Not because Bruce had humiliated him, but because, in some way, he had become a mirror. Every time a student asked him about the real Bruce Lee, Sammo responded with stories of speed, of discipline, of a mind that never stopped. But deep down, he knew the truth was simpler: Bruce didn't fight others. He fought against himself. And he won. The last time Sammo saw the ghost of that confrontation was in 1993, during the premiere of Iron Monkey. The cinema was packed, the audience was cheering, but he couldn't concentrate. In the dark, amidst the applause, I swore I heard the sound of a kick cutting through the air. When the lights came on, a young reporter approached, recorder in hand. "Sifu, what's it like to be compared to Bruce Lee all the time?" Sammo looked up at the ceiling, as if the answer was written in the beams. Then he smiled, a tired, almost paternal smile. "I'm not compared to him. I'm remembered for fighting him. And that's more than most men can say." The reporter wrote down the sentence, but didn't understand it. Sammo knew that nobody really understood. Because the lesson of that day in the playground wasn't about winning or losing. It was about realizing that sometimes the biggest opponent is not in front of you, but within you. And that, in the end, the only fight that really matters is the one you fight against your own limitations. When he left the cinema that night, the Hong Kong air was damp, thick with the smell of the sea and gasoline. Sammo lit a cigarette, a habit Bruce would have disapproved of, and walked toward the harbor. There, among the anchored boats, he closed his eyes and let the breeze carry away the weight of the years. History would remember Bruce Lee. But Sammo hung, in the silence of that night, finally forgave himself for not having been him. And that, after all, was a greater victory than any trophy. The weight of time. The years passed like waves crashing against the harbor pillars. Sammo grew old, but not like other men, not with resignation, but with a clarity that only came from accepting one's place in the world. He still trained, still filmed, still laughed too loudly on sets, scaring extras and making directors roll their eyes. But now there was something different about his movements. There was no longer the urgency to prove anything to anyone. It was the lightness of someone who knew that the real fight had already been fought. One night, in a Kowloon restaurant, a young actor approached his table. The boy had the same fire in his eyes that Sammo recognized from decades ago, the same hunger to be seen, to be the best. He introduced himself as Jackie, a name that was already beginning to circulate in action film circles. "Sifu, I heard that you trained with Bruce Lee," said the young man, almost breathless. "I wanted to know what it was like." "How did he do that?" Sammo looked at the half-finished plate of fried rice. He remembered the sweat, the screams, the sound of fists hitting sandbags. He remembered Bruce saying, "Don't be a glass. Be the water." And he remembered, too, how he himself had spent years trying to be a bigger, stronger, brighter glass, when all it needed was to flow. "He was fast," Sammo finally replied. But it wasn't just that. He understood that speed without purpose is just noise. Jackie frowned, as if expecting a secret formula. Sammo smiled and pushed his plate aside. "Sit down. Let's train tomorrow." Training began at dawn, in the same courtyard where Sammo had learned, and failed, so many times. Jackie arrived full of energy, jumping around like a tiger cub. Sammo, on the other hand, moved slowly, as if each step was a meditation. "First, you need to learn how to fall," Sammo said, and before Jackie could protest, he yanked on his foot and knocked him to the ground. The young man stood up angrily, but Sammo just crossed his arms. Again. They repeated the movement 10, 20 times. Jackie began to sweat, to curse, to question. Sammo said nothing. Just waited. "Why do I need to learn to fall?" Jackie finally exploded. "I want to learn to win." Sammo sighed. It was always the same question. Because everyone falls. The difference is who gets up knowing that the fall is not the end. Jackie looked at him, confused. Sammo reached out and helped him to his feet once more. "Now attack." The young man came forward with everything, a punch straight to the face. Sammo dodged it easily, but instead of counterattacking, he grabbed Jackie's fist and spun him around, making him lose his balance. Another fall. "You're fighting me," Sammo said. "But I am not your enemy." Jackie dropped to her knees, breathing hard. "So who is it?" Sammo reached out again. "Yourself." Months passed. Jackie learned to fall, to breathe, to observe. He learned that true strength was not in muscles, but in patience. And Sammo, in turn, discovered something he didn't expect: teaching was another way of forgiving himself. Every mistake he corrected in the young man, every lesson he passed on, was as if he was rewriting his own faults. One night, after an exhausting session, Jackie sat next to Sammo on the patio steps. The Hong Kong sky was stained orange and purple, as if the skyline itself was on fire. "Do you think I'll be as good as him?" Jackie asked, looking at her hands. Sammo laughed, a husky, heartfelt sound. "No. You'll be better." Jackie turned to him, surprised. "Better than Bruce Lee?" "No. Better than you were yesterday." The young man was silent. Sammo lit a cigarette, the last one, he promised himself, and let the smoke mingle with the night air. Life is not a competition. It's a series of falls and rises. And if you learn to fall well, you will realize that the ground is not your enemy. It's just the place where you start again. Years later, when Sammo no longer trained, when his knees ached and his hands shook slightly when holding a cup of tea, he watched a film on television. It was one of those action blockbusters, full of explosions and impossible choreography. And there was Jackie, now a household name around the world, moving with a grace that Sammo recognized as his own heritage. A scene caught his attention. Jackie was on the ground, injured, but instead of getting up immediately, he took a deep breath, looked at his hands, and smiled. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture. But Sammo saw it. He turned off the television and walked out onto the porch. Below, the city of Hong Kong pulsed, alive, indifferent. He thought of Bruce, of Jackie, of all the men who had passed through his life like shadows and mirrors. He thought of himself, of the boy who one day believed that glory lay in being the strongest. And then, for the first time in decades, he cried. They weren't tears of sadness. They were of relief. Because I finally understood that victory was not in never falling. It was about getting up every time and continuing walking. Even if limping. Even if slowly. Sammo closed his eyes and let the wind carry his tears. And just like that, the fight ended. The last round. The days that followed were strangely calm. Sammo would wake up early, drink his green tea in the silence of the kitchen and watch the sun rise over the skyscrapers of Hong Kong. There was no longer the urgency of training, the pressure of cameras, the weight of expectations. Just him, the wind and the distant echo of the city's voices. One morning, while walking through the street market near his apartment, he heard someone call his name. He was a short man, with gray hair and tired eyes, dressed in a shabby suit. Sammo didn't recognize him right away, but something about the way he moved, slowly, hesitantly, felt familiar. Sammo Hung, said the man, stopping a few feet away. Or should I call him Dago? Sammo frowned. The nickname, given to him in his glory days, sounded like a reminder of a world that no longer existed. Who are you? He asked, without harshness, just curiosity. The man smiled, a smile that carried decades of defeat. You don't remember me. It makes sense. I was just another fighter in their shadows. He extended his hand. My name is Wing. Wing Lam. Sammo squeezed his hand, feeling the rough calluses, the scars on his knuckles. A fighter. Always a fighter. What do you want, Wing? Nothing. The man shrugged. Or maybe everything. It depends on how you see it. I just wanted to see it with my own eyes. They say you gave up. Who left everything? I didn't give up, Sammo corrected, looking at his hands. I just stopped fighting the inevitable. Wing nodded, as if expecting exactly that answer. I stopped too. Or rather, they stopped me. Spine injury. I never got into a ring again. He laughed, a dry sound. Sometimes I still dream that I'm fighting. I wake up sweating, with my fists clenched. But then I look in the mirror and see an old man. Sammo said nothing. There was nothing to say. You were lucky, Wing continued. It had its glory. Your name in history. I was just one more. A body that broke before it got there. The wind blew between them, carrying the smell of hot oil and spices from the market. Sammo felt the weight of those words, but not like before. Not like a knife in the chest. Just as a fact. Do you still train? He asked suddenly. Wing blinked in surprise. What? Train. Do you still do your exercises? Stretches? Punching bag? The man hesitated. No. For what? I'm not a fighter anymore. Sammo shook his head. You will always be a fighter, Wing. Even if you never step into a ring again. He pointed to his own chest. The fight doesn't end when you stop fighting. It just changes shape. Wing looked at him for a long moment. Then something in his face broke. Not tears, not a smile. Just silent acceptance. Thank you, he murmured. Sammo patted him on the shoulder. Take care of yourself, Wing. And he continued on his way. The months passed. Sammo started teaching in a small gym in the Kowloon neighborhood, a simple place, with peeling walls and patched-together punching bags. It wasn't the fame, it wasn't the money. It was something more. His students were young, some with dreams of becoming action movie stars, others just wanting to learn how to defend themselves. But there was one, a skinny, wide-eyed boy named Jin, who reminded him of himself decades ago. Sifu, why did you stop fighting? Jian asked one afternoon as he adjusted his foot position for a kick. Sammo stopped, thoughtful. Because I realized that it wasn't the fight that mattered. That's what I learned from her. And what did you learn? Sammo smiled. That life is like a round. You fall, get up, fall again. But if you're still standing when the bell rings, you've won. Jian frowned, trying to understand. So, you won? Sammo laughed. Not yet. The fight never ends, boy. Just change the ring. Years later, Sammo sat on the same balcony, looking out at the city that never slept. Her hair was whiter, her back was more curved, but her eyes still shone with the same intensity. Jian, now a grown man, appeared at the door. Sifu, the film festival people are here. They want to pay tribute to you. Sammo shook his head. Tell them I'm too old for these things. They won't accept a no. Then say that I have already received my honor. He pointed to the gym, where young voices echoed between the punches of the bags. It's there. Jiang smiled. Will you, at least? Sammo sighed, but there was a smile on his lips. I go. But only if you promise one thing. What? That he will continue fighting. Even when you think you lost. Jian nodded seriously. I promise. And so, Sammo stood up, leaning on the cane that now accompanied him. He was no longer the invincible fighter he once was. But he was something better, a man who had learned to fall and get up, as many times as necessary. The fight, after all, never ended. She just transformed.